America, 1933. The Great Depression has brought the nation to its knees. 13 million unemployed. Banks failing. Farms foreclosed. Democracy itself seems to be failing. Across the Atlantic, a different answer is rising. Fascism. Order through force. Prosperity through dictatorship. In Germany, in Italy, strongmen promise to make their nations great again. Some are watching. Some are learning. Some are preparing to bring it home. Major General Smedley Butler, 2 Congressional Medals of Honor, 16 military decorations, one of the most decorated officers in United States Marine Corps history, a man who had spent his life in service to his country. But by 1933, Butler had become something else. A critic, a voice in the wilderness, warning about the marriage of military power and corporate greed.
I spent most of my time being a high-class muscle man for big business. I helped make Mexico safe for American oil interests. I helped make Haiti and Cuba a decent place for the National City Bank boys to collect revenues in. I helped purify Nicaragua for the international banking house of Brown Brothers. Looking back on it, I feel I might have given Al Capone a few hints.
This was not a man who could be easily bought, and that made him dangerous, or perhaps useful. The summer of 1933. Butler receives visitors. They say they want to talk about the American Legion, about the upcoming National Convention in Chicago, about leadership. Gerald McGuire, Bond salesman, Connecticut commander of the American Legion, a man of modest origins who now moved in circles of extraordinary wealth. What McGuire proposed seemed innocent enough. A speech at the convention, Butler's expenses paid, his travel arranged, a chance to influence the direction of the nation's largest veterans organization. Butler declined, but McGuire kept coming back. Behind McGuire stood men of considerable power. Grayson Murphy, Wall Street banker, founder of the American Legion, a man who moved between boardrooms and government with practiced ease. Robert Sterling Clark, heir to the Singer sewing machine fortune, wealth beyond measure, connections that reached into every corner of American business, and behind them, or so Butler would later testify, an entire network of industrialists and financiers. Men who viewed Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal not as salvation, but as theft, not as reform, but as revolution. Roosevelt had abandoned the gold standard. He had raised taxes on the wealthy. He had given power to unions. He had made government the enemy of concentrated wealth. And to men accustomed to getting their way, this was intolerable.
I believe that hoarding during the past week has become an exceedingly unfashionable pastime.
McGuire traveled to Europe, to France, to Italy, to Germany. He studied the fascist movements there. The veterans organizations that had helped bring Mussolini to power, the SA that had terrorized Germany into submission. He was looking for a model, a blueprint, a way to organize American veterans into a force that could reshape the nation. And when he returned, his proposals to Butler became more explicit, more disturbing, more treasonous. August 1934, the Bellevue Stratford Hotel in Philadelphia. Butler agrees to meet with McGuire one final time. What he hears will change everything.
McGuire told me that everything was ready, that they had $3 million immediately available with more to follow, that they wanted to organize a veterans organization of 500,000 men, that I was to be the leader.
The plan was elaborate, calculated. They would use the American Legion's massive membership, 500,000 veterans who trusted Butler, who would follow him.
The organization was to be used to intimidate the government, to force Roosevelt to create a new position, Secretary of General Affairs. I would hold this position. Roosevelt would remain president in name only, a puppet.
McGuire offered Butler a comparison: Mussolini and the King of Italy. The king remained on his throne, but everyone knew where the real power lay. Butler asked what would happen if Roosevelt refused to cooperate. McGuire's response was chilling.
We need a fascist government in this country to save the nation from the communists who want to tear it down. The only men who have the patriotism to do it are the soldiers, and you are the ideal leader.
$3 million immediately. More to follow. 500,000 veterans. A march on Washington that would make Roosevelt capitulate or face removal. But Butler was not the man they thought he was. November 20th, 1934. The Special Committee on Un-American Activities. Representatives John McCormack of Massachusetts and Samuel Dickstein of New York. Their mandate: to investigate Nazi propaganda and subversive activities in America. What they were about to hear would be one of the most extraordinary testimonies in congressional history. General Smedley Butler took the oath, and for hours he spoke. Names, dates, conversations, amounts. A decorated war hero accusing some of the wealthiest men in America of plotting treason.
I was told they had access to unlimited funds, that the American Liberty League and other organizations were prepared to support the movement, that prominent men in finance and industry were ready to act.
Butler named names: Gerald McGuire, Grayson Murphy, Robert Sterling Clark. He implicated connections to J.P. Morgan, to DuPont, to the most powerful financial institutions in the nation. Paul Comley French, a Philadelphia journalist, testified next.
I swear to tell
He had investigated Butler's claims independently. He had met with McGuire himself, and his testimony corroborated everything Butler had said.
McGuire told me in his own words that we needed a fascist government to save the nation, that Butler was perfect to lead it, that the money was ready, that the plans were laid.
2 witnesses, independent accounts, specific details. A congressional committee faced with an impossible choice: dismiss the testimony of a decorated general and an independent journalist, or accept that wealthy Americans had plotted to overthrow their own government. February 15th, 1935. The committee releases its final report. The language is careful, measured, but unmistakable. There is no question that these attempts were discussed, were planned, and might have been placed in execution when and if the financial backers deemed it expedient. Read those words again. No question that these attempts were discussed, were planned. Not dismissed as fantasy, not rejected as fabrication, confirmed. A congressional committee had concluded that a conspiracy to establish fascism in America had been real, that it had been discussed, that it had been planned, that it might have been executed. And then, nothing. The New York Times buried the story, a few paragraphs on an inside page. Other major newspapers followed suit. Minimal coverage, skeptical tone. Within weeks, The story had disappeared from the national conversation. No arrests were made, no prosecutions filed. The Justice Department took no action. The men Butler named continued their careers without interruption. Grayson Murphy remained on Wall Street. Robert Sterling Clark continued his business affairs. It was as if the entire episode had never happened. Butler himself spoke out. On radio stations, in speeches, he was furious.
Like most committees, it has slaughtered the little and allowed the big to escape. The big shots weren't even called to testify. They were all mentioned in the testimony. Why was all mention of these names suppressed?
A congressional committee doesn't say there is no question these attempts were discussed and planned unless they're convinced. Butler had no reason to lie. He risked everything by coming forward. What we know for certain is this: conversations happened. Proposals were made. Money was offered. Plans were discussed. And at the center of it all was a decorated general who chose country over conspiracy. The business plot raises uncomfortable questions about power in America, about the relationship between wealth and democracy, about what happens when economic elites view popular government as a threat to their interests. In the 1930s, some business leaders openly admired Mussolini. They praised Hitler's efficiency. They spoke of the need for strong leadership to protect property and order. Today, we find these views repugnant, but at the time, they were expressed openly in respectable circles. The plot also reveals something else: the fragility of democratic institutions, how easily they can be threatened, how dependent they are on individuals who choose to defend them. Smedley Butler could have led the coup. He had the credibility, the popularity, the respect of veterans. Maguire and his backers believed he would do it. They were wrong. Butler chose to expose the plot instead. He testified under oath. He risked his reputation. He faced the skepticism and dismissal of people who found his story too extraordinary to believe. And in doing so, he may have saved American democracy from a test it was not prepared to face. In 1935, the McCormick-Dickstein Committee wrote in its report that the conspiracy might have been placed in execution when and if the financial backers deemed it expedient. Might have been. Words that carry enormous weight. The committee believed the plot was real, that it was ready, that only circumstance, perhaps Butler's refusal, perhaps the timing, perhaps other factors we'll never know, prevented its execution. We live in the world where it didn't happen, where the coup was exposed rather than executed, where democracy survived. But the business plot reminds us that survival is not guaranteed, that democratic institutions are only as strong as the people who defend them, that wealth and power can corrupt even the most fundamental principles of self-governance. General Butler died in 1940. By then, the world was at war. America would soon be fighting against the very fascism that some of its citizens had once wanted to bring home. His story was largely forgotten. The names of the alleged conspirators faded from memory. The congressional report gathered dust in archives. But the questions remain. What happens when democracy threatens wealth? When popular will challenges concentrated power? When citizens choose leaders that economic elites find unacceptable? Democracy is fragile. It always has been. The business plot of 1933 is a reminder that the threat can come from anywhere, even from those we least expect, even from those who claim to be its defenders.